Chapter 5. In Search of Lost Cheekiness. A Lutheran saying, "A timid ass seldom lets go with a joyful fart." Quoting Friedrich Nietzsche, Beyond Good and Evil. The objection, the side leap, light-hearted mistrust, the pleasure and mockery are signs of health. Everything that is unqualified belongs to pathology. Quoting Danton before sentence is passed on him. They have laid their hands on my entire life, so let it stand up and confront them. Part 1. Greek philosophy of cheekiness. Cynicism. Ancient cynicism, at least in its Greek origins, is in principle cheeky. In its cheekiness lies a method worthy of discovery. The first really dialectical materialism, which was also an existentialism, is viewed unjustly, beside the great systems in Greek philosophy, Plato, Aristotle and the Stoa, as a mere game of satyrs, as a half-jovial, half-dirty episode, and is passed over. In kynismos, a kind of argumentation was discovered that, to the present day, respectable thinking does not know how to deal with. Is it not crude and grotesque to pick one's nose while Socrates exorcises his demon and speaks of the divine soul? Can it really be called anything other than vulgar when Diogenes lets a fart fly against the Platonic theory of ideas? Or is fartiness itself one of the ideas God discharged from his meditation on the genesis of the cosmos? And what is it supposed to mean when this philosophizing town bum answers Plato's subtle theory of eros by masturbating in public? To understand these apparently irrelevantly provocative gestures, it is worth reflecting on a principle that called into being the doctrines of wisdom, and that was regarded by the ancient world as a truism, before modern developments eradicated it. For the philosopher, the human being who exemplifies the love of truth and conscious living, life and doctrine must be in harmony. The core of every doctrine is what its followers embody of it. This can be understood in an idealistic way, as if it were philosophy's innermost aim to get people to chase after unattainable ideals. But if philosophers are called on to live what they say, their task in a critical sense is much more to say what they live. Since time immemorial, every ideality must be materialized, and every materiality idealized in order to be real for us, as beings in the middle. A separation of person and thing, theory and praxis at this elementary level cannot be taken into consideration at all, except perhaps as a sign of a corruption of truth. To embody a doctrine means to make oneself into its medium. This is the opposite of what is demanded in the moralistic plea for behaviour guided strictly by ideals. By paying attention to what can be embodied, we remain protected from moral demagogy and from the terror of radical abstractions that cannot be lived out. The question is not, what is virtue without terror, but what is terror other than consistent idealism? The appearance of Diogenes marks the most dramatic moment in the process of truth of early European philosophy, whereas high theory, from Plato on, irrevocably cuts off the threads to material embodiment in order instead to draw the threads of argumentation all the more tightly together into a logical fabric. There emerges a subversive variant of low theory that pantomimically and grotesquely carries practical embodiment to an extreme. The process of truth splits into a discursive phalanx of grand theory and a satirical literary troupe of skirmishers. With Diogenes, the resistance against the rigged game of discourse begins in European philosophy. Desperately funny, he resists the linguistification of the cosmic universalism that called the philosopher to this occupation. Whether monologic or dialogic theory, in both, Diogenes smells the swindle of idealistic abstractions and the schizoid staleness of a thinking limited to the head. Thus he creates, as the last archaic sophist, and the first in the tradition of satirical resistance, an uncivil enlightenment. He starts the non-Platonic dialogue. Here, Apollo, the god of illumination, shows his other face, which escaped Nietzsche, as thinking satyr, oppressor, comedian. The deadly arrows of truth rain down on the places where lies lull themselves into security behind authorities. Low theory here for the first time seals a pact with poverty and satire. From this perspective, the significance of cheekiness is easily shown. Since philosophy can only hypocritically live out what it says, it takes cheek to say what is lived. In a culture in which hardened idealisms make lies into a form of living, the process of truth depends on whether people can be found who are aggressive and free, shameless enough to speak the truth. Those who rule lose their real self-confidence to the fools, clowns, and cynics. For this reason, an anecdote has Alexander the Great say that he would like to be Diogenes if he were not Alexander. If he were not the fool of his political ambition, he would have to play the fool in order to speak the truth to people and to himself. And when the powerful begin, for their part, to think cynically, when they know the truth about themselves and in spite of this go on as before, then they completely fulfill the modern definition of cynicism. By the way, only in the last few centuries has the word cheeky, frech, gained a negative connotation. Initially, as for example in Old High German, it meant a productive aggressivity, letting fly at the enemy. Brave, bold, lively, plucky, untamed, ardent. The devitalization of a culture is mirrored in the history of this word. Those who are still cheeky today were not affected by the cooling off of the materialist heat as much as those who are inconvenienced by brazen people would like. The prototype of the cheeky is the Jewish David, who teases Goliath, "Come here, so I can hit you better." He shows that the head has not only ears to hear and obey, but also a brow with which to menacingly defy the stronger. Rebellion, affront, effrontery. Greek cynicism discovers the animal body in the human, and its gestures as arguments. It develops a pantomimic materialism. Diogenes refutes the language of philosophers with that of the clown. Quoting Diogenes Laertius, volume 6, page 40. When Plato put forward the definition of the human as a featherless biped and was applauded for it, he tore the feathers from a rooster and brought it into Plato's school, saying, "That is Plato's human," and as a result the phrase was added, "with flattened nails." That, and not Aristotelianism, is the real philosophical antithesis to Socrates and Plato. Plato and Aristotle are both master thinkers, even if a spark of Socrates' plebeian street philosophy is still present in the Platonic ironies and dialectic mannerisms. Diogenes and his followers countered this with an essentially plebeian reflection. Only the theory of this cheekiness can open up access to a political history of combative reflections. This makes the history of philosophy possible as dialectical social history. It is the history of the embodiment and the splitting of consciousness. Since, however, cynicism has made speaking the truth dependent on the factors of courage, cheekiness, and risk, the process of truth gets caught in a previously unknown moral tension. I call it the dialectic of disinhibition. Those who take the liberty of confronting prevailing lies provoke a climate of satirical loosening up, in which the powerful, together with their ideologists of domination, let go effectively, precisely under the onslaught of the critical affront of cynics. But while cynics support their cheekiness with a life of ascetic integrity, they are answered, from the side of the attacked, by an idealism within disinhibition that is disguised as outrage, and that, in the most extreme case, can go as far as extermination. An essential aspect of power is that it only likes to laugh at its own jokes.